This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
One of the things I would say is actually in the public sector, especially when you're managing cities and city infrastructure, but all the residents in there, is a lot more complicated. So there's a lot of complexity here. We talk about climate change, that's going to happen in the cities. We talk about residents and health. Those are city issues. We talk about, fixed assets and buildings. And, you can see in private sector, each one of these would be its own area of, value that each individual company provides. It has a segmentation of customers. It has certain products. It has a well-defined supply chain. It's not the case in cities. Quite often it relies on collaboration.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences and insights at edsxevents.com. Gurpreet Muctor, Chief Data and Technology Officer at Westminster City Council. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Hi, David. Thank you for welcoming me. I think it's a great opportunity to have a discussion about what digital means in local government.
Yeah, well, let's just set a bit of context, perhaps, for our international audience who may well have heard of Westminster City, but could you set the scene for us? It's in London, but in terms of how London administration works and where Westminster City Council fits within that, what can you tell us?
So London actually is made of a number of boroughs, but there's actually two cities within that cohort of 30 plus boroughs. One is obviously the city of Westminster, and the other is obviously more famously probably the city of London. And Westminster's a really interesting place because, all the landmark places we have, Buckingham Palace, Parliament, Covent Garden, even Knightsbridge, all they fall within Westminster. So it's I suppose, a city of global significance. And it does get a lot of attention. So when you have the coronation and you have national state events, they all fall within the city. So it's quite a significant city. It's got a population of around 220 to 250,000 residents. But obviously, because of its location, it can have a daily population of up to 1 million with tourists and commuters and so on and so forth. So a really interesting and complex city with a global significance.
Yeah, lots of unique qualities, certainly in the UK there, with that mix, as you put it. And today, I really want to chat with you about some of the lessons that you've learnt in leveraging data, leveraging technology to benefit businesses, the tourists, the citizens and residents in one of the busiest parts of one of the busiest cities in the world. But also, just digging back a little bit, some of your experiences on transitioning from private sector to public sector. And then, as we do in every episode on the show, I just want to talk about some of your leadership insights and some of your, secrets. They won't be a secret after this podcast, but hey, let's see how we get on. Does that all sound okay? Is that a good plan?
Sounds good to me, David.
Fantastic. Right. First of all, a quick one about your background, because you started off not in technology, but in biomedical science. What was it that prompted the change from the science lab to, sort of the computer lab and eventually into tech leadership?
So I think I've always, been interested in the natural world. And biotech was, I think, when you go to university, biology becomes almost chemistry becomes physics, etc. Yeah. And this was obviously before STEM was really kicking off. One thing I realized going through that course was actually I really liked the elements around ecosystems and how, complex systems get together, and studying those at a more, epidemic and pandemic level, those complexities, rather than probably the experiments in the lab sort of approach and that career. So that really got me thinking, actually, what do I really like enjoying this course? And from there, obviously, the dot-com, the boom was happening in the early, late 1999, to early 200. So, there's a lot of opportunity. And I thought, actually, it'd be really good to get involved in technology, but not technology from a programming. So I chose a master's at LSE, which was really around social science. So it talked about technology and philosophy, economic development, and so on and so forth. And that really resonated from my passion around, just complex systems in the natural world as well. I then moved into a number of different sectors, starting in telecoms, manufacturing, utilities, mainly, in a lot of private sector, international companies as well. So French, Japanese, European, even UK. So that's been my journey. But most of my focus has really been around, I guess, taking new products and services and offers to market, but also around transformation. So I typically don't come from the traditional CIO route, but it's more around the innovation and R&D and how do we, I guess, help organizations grow the market share, improve experiences for their customers, and I guess improve productivity as well.
It's certainly not the first time we've spoken with somebody with that kind of journey, starting off in the science lab and then moving on into a technology role. And we spoke, I think it was in season 1, actually, with Wendy Ng from Marks and Spencer, who is in a BSO role there. And she started off really, really very, very deep into molecular biology. And now she works in cybersecurity, but the parallels that she drew, you speak about an interest in systems, in ecosystems, and the parallels that she's drawn between her understanding how systems heal, how systems get attacked, how viruses can spread, translating that directly into her experience in industry and cybersecurity now. There's a very strong link between the two, and it's fascinating to hear about the personal journey, I suppose, of understanding what it is that makes you tick, what it is that excites you professionally as well. A lot of private sector experience there you mentioned on your CV, but what about that move then into public sector and where you are at Westminster City Council? What was it that motivated that? And I guess what have been the main reflections about the differences between the private and the public sector world? Have there been any surprises there for you?
I think that's a question that a lot of people do ask. And I think it's sometimes a question where they have a predetermined answer to say, actually, private sector is more sort of innovative, there's more excitement, it's faster paced, etc. And I'm kind of really glad to say that actually I don't think that is the case in my experience. So one of the things I would say is actually in the public sector, especially when you're managing cities and city infrastructure, but all the residents in there, is a lot more complicated. So there's a lot of complexity here. We talk about climate change, that's going to happen in the cities. We talk about residents and health. Those are city issues. We talk about, fixed assets and buildings. And, you can see in private sector, each one of these would be its own area of, I guess, value that each individual company provides. It has a segmentation of customers, it has certain products, it has a well-defined supply chain. It's not the case in cities. Quite often it relies on collaboration. So that's one of the things I would say. It's more open. It's more about working in partnerships and business ecosystems. I suppose this is a local government city ecosystem, I suppose, where you have private and public sector, you have residents, you have fixed infrastructure. So I think that's been a key thing. And I think that diversity is also, I think, an opportunity to really have a broad spectrum of innovation opportunities. So, taking some more experience, in manufacturing, we'd always talk about shift left. So how do we get to maintenance and predictive and so on? So moving away from that break fix. So if you can extend that asset life cycle, it's better overall, both for the customer and for yourself as an organization. And those principles still apply because cities have to manage physical infrastructure. It's no different. You have housing, you have highways, you have, buildings. You've got on the other side, social adults. So how do you really use, innovation around improving some of those challenges around adult social care? So I think my second takeaway is actually the scope for innovation is immense. And obviously my experience is quite limited to Westminster, but I would say that actually there is an ambition, both you can see from central government, and within Westminster around really, taking innovation and transforming the way we deliver public services. So I think those are the things that I would actually say it's just as innovative. I think the challenge we have both is about usually finance. Everything has to kind of tie up with pressures and so on. But I think in terms of innovation and market leading, I think there's a lot of synergy between the two areas. Obviously, the goals are different. Where did your transformation in public sector? It's about revenue. It's about, your bottom line, your top line, etc. In the public sector, it's probably not so clear cut, even though finance has to play a part.
Would you say it's that innovation that's the biggest surprise for you then, kind of moving from one world to the other, that sense of innovation? And you speak about the preconceptions, perhaps, about the change of pace and change of, if maybe pace, not pressure. Would you say that's the biggest, or those are the biggest things that have not impacted you, but have struck you since the move?
I don't think so, because when I was looking at my next opportunity, I was always, conscious that actually I want to go to a disruptive space, a disruptive industry. So, there is a lot of disruption in sort of, for example, electrification or, electric cars. So the car industry itself and the infrastructure required there. There's energy. There's a lot of green transition in energy. And, and I think there has been also, a view that actually smart cities is another disruptive place to say, how do we actually manage the smart city? And Google had very early sort of attempts of this in Canada. And you hear about it was very technologically driven or deterministic then. And I think that shifted. So I don't think so. I think the biggest challenge, if I say, has been the big surprise is about the difficulty of prioritization. That has been the challenge because, is climate more of a priority than housing? Is more a priority than, children or adults? That's the challenge I think I've found. And it's not always about the financial returns when you have, political and sort of resident opinion and feedback to take into account.
And I guess when you are working in private sector, it's the job of the senior leadership there to make the mission statements as clear as possible. But given the breadth of the mission that you have with residents, businesses, everything else in a city, then it's impossible, isn't it, really, to try and make a single direction there when you have so many stakeholders, so many things that are calling on your attention. It's not as though you can drop public transport for 12 months and focus on sustainability or whatever else. You kind of have to keep all of those plates spinning at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good observation, David, because that is a challenge. And you've also got your core services to keep the council safe, secure, modernized, and all of the sort of the housekeeping really stay on top of. And you're right. I think that's where we have competing priorities, and there is a finite amount of resources that councils have and any public institution has, and where is that spent? Because it's not exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think part of my role is to say, how do we build some of the common foundations that actually, where each of these services want to get to in terms of their transformation? How do those common capabilities help all of those services? And where do we need to drive down specific sort of problem statements? That is a challenge. And I think that ambiguity is one of the things that we have to work through. And I don't think you can have a predetermined approach to this. I think it is making a judgment calls as we go along. But it's also, again, trying to get some stability to make those big changes which are required and balancing the need for day-to-day sort of intervention. So I think that's the other challenge we've got. So we've got horizontal engagement challenge and we've got vertical sort of day-to-day operating challenges.
So let's come on to your role and what it is that you are tasked with trying to build or trying to enable. How do you articulate that succinctly?
So the first thing I'll say is we are revisiting our technology, AI, data approach and strategy over the next, I guess, medium to near term. The way we're approaching it is because of the considerable amount of upheaval and change and innovation happening in, for example, AI. We do need to basically revisit that more frequently. So more like a product. How do we extend that product? How do we revisit it? But also take into account external feedback from residents, like a political sort of cabinet and councillors, but internally with services as well. And I think the thing that will probably, I don't want to predict the technology space, but there's the focus on AI and productivity, but also radically helping, to deploy technology to curtail demand in public sector services. That is, I think, where we're probably going to land. So how do we move some of our service models from a break fix, oh no, there's an issue, we have to come to the council and we have to intervene, which is always more costly, both personally, health-wise, financially, and generally to society, to a predictive and proactive approach to managing some of these challenges that we have, whether it's assets, whether it's probably, social care, whether it's housing, homelessness, and those. So it's transforming service models, I think, and the capabilities that technology, AI, and data can then deliver to enable that to happen with the services, in collaboration with the services.
So let's try and make some of this tangible then. Are there any examples that you can share of the ways, consider me as a business owner in the city or a resident perhaps, are there ways that you can talk to about how technology and data, which is of course a big part of your role as well, are having an impact on the experience as a resident, as a citizen, as a business owner in the city right now? What interventions, what programs have you put in place, are you putting in place, and what difference are they making to me?
Yeah, so one of the areas that I guess we're focused on is air quality. And air quality is an issue because we know it affects obviously health, and there's obviously a national sort of objective around trying to deliver air quality which is within the World Health Organization standards. So there's a couple of things that we've done around there, particularly around data IoT. So one of the things that we did find out from our communities was actually they want to have better visibility of the quality of the air in their neighborhoods and their areas. So we launched a air quality dashboard that's out there. Some of the data is being used again for plans, lesson planning in schools, because there was an experiment done with a team where they kind of presented some of this data back to schools with a view to say, actually, every time you get dropped off in a car, the pollution levels go up, and that translates to this much carbon and so on and so forth. And that behavioral experiment really did have an marked impact in terms of changing commuting behavior. So it was just a hands-up survey, but we measured the air quality again, a period down the line, and actually had reduced. So, so that was a way of actually getting data out to make, for people to make some decisions. And then an evolution from there, the team's been really working on a clean air walking route finder, which hopefully we'll be launching in soon, where it takes that air quality data. We then plot some routes. So if you want to get from A to B in London, it will give you 3 options. That's your cleanest route. That's probably amber. That's your probably less cleanest air quality route. The cleanest may be through longer, but it'll expose you less to, expose you to less, I guess, polluting air. And so this again would be a service that citizens can use, both within Westminster, but wider as well across London.
So kind of, and forgive me for mentioning a product name, but City Mapper, of course, is a tool that I use whenever I'm traversing cities, well, really all over the world, but it has its home, I think, in London. But a kind of City Mapper for clean air walking routes, getting from A to B, and different options for doing that. Yes,
exactly. And again, it just gives choice in the hands of people, an informed choice, data-driven choices. So that's kind of, but we're also using AI for reporting street issues. So we've launched a product a year or two ago called Reported, and that uses, we did a lot of research around, the experiences of residents reporting street issues like, graffiti, waste, potholes, etc. Okay. It's not an easy experience that, many of us will testify. And so we really try to look more radically in terms of how can we deploy AI to make, that transactional cost lower and improve that customer experience. So now we have a chatbot. You open the chatbot, you can take a picture. It will automatically work at your location, your GPS. It will look at the picture and say, actually, we think you've got, graffiti on the wall. It doesn't show explicit. So all those manual data entry points that citizens have to do is now being removed. And so it helps us kind of capture that data, make that experience better, but also feed that back into our services to then go and address the city issues that have been reported. So that's another example of where we deploying technology, and it's really around changing, incrementally some of those services that we already have, and making them much more digitally, intuitively accessible.
Yeah, and that is, as you know, if you're working in private, in retail in particular, it's customer centric. So I guess you would talk about citizen centricity or something a little bit pithier than that, perhaps. But that's where you're looking at. You are looking at making those services, whether it's a pain point that exists right now with the graffiti, with the street issues, or whether it is a more broadly understood pain point, air quality, for example, and providing options. I don't know how many of your citizens are banging on your door right now asking for a city mapper for air quality and different transport directions, but it would certainly be something that would add value once it became available. Prioritising those, again, surely is one of those challenges that you have to face, though.
Yeah, and some of the challenges that we have in terms of our strategy. So air quality is one. We've talked about net zero strategy and also declared a biodiversity crisis as well. But there are others in there which will take longer to solve because they are more challenging, more complex. And that's one of the reasons we are actually, one of the foundational things that we're doing is upgrading our data infrastructure, so that we can make it easier to get to market for a number of the other areas as well. So it's great. So some of these are greenfield. They don't take in personal information. It is very much about external city data, which you could probably access as well. Some of the other challenges we've got are more systemic, really require a lot of personal information. They may have very sensitive information. That's that is a more immediate term goal that we're trying to address. And so I guess the approach we're taking is, can we still innovate where it's possible in the short run, but also focus on some of the bigger challenges that local authorities and Westminster have around temporary accommodation, homelessness, and so on. Yeah. And those challenges, to tackle those, do require a step change in our digital infrastructure as well. So I think there is a challenge about which ones do you prioritize first. Is it really around internally productivity? Is it external services that residents want? Is it really around finance and the budgets that we've got, the pressures around temporary accommodation? And I think that's the ambiguity, we have to work through and get to there's no probably correct answer, but it's probably what judgments do you make at what point in time with the information you have to make those priority calls.
And then once you have aligned on, brilliant, we're going to be focusing on this, this, and this, and obviously we'll keep these things on the burners as well. In terms of them fulfilling those objectives within your mission, what are the hurdles? Is it the technology itself, the availability? Is it the skills in order to integrate and develop that? Is it the processes? Is it the availability of data? What are the different levers, the different hurdles that you're trying to scale in order to deliver on those objectives? So I suppose this comes back to an earlier question. You kind of mentioned in terms of what was my big surprise moving in from a private to a public sector. I suppose one of the things that I noticed was, I guess, the lack of, innovation within the technology that is used within the local authority sector. So that was a little bit, so we would, now if a system doesn't have an API, you would never even consider it. I mean, but these scenarios still ring true in some of those specialist tools that we have. So technology certainly is. And I think one of the, I mentioned this before, a key thing for me is to build and implement a digital infrastructure that has flexibility, that can be adapted, because we know the world and technology is going to change. So it needs to be flexible and adaptable. But it's that digital infrastructure that makes, it makes us a future ready council. So, and that's really the core elements. Before, I've been around transformation for a long time, right? And we've always talked about, and it's had different cycles, from, cloud, SaaS, applications, how do we link them all together, etc. I think the fundamental difference through where we are now, it's all data driven.
And therefore, your core engine is your data platforms. It is not those line of business applications, which really are important from an operational perspective. But when you want to build new digital services, insights, that's where that core capability. And so it's reconfiguring the architecture and the digital infrastructure. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge both from a time, a resource, skills, and budget perspective as well. The other element, I think, you've mentioned obviously culture, skills. We all hear AI is quite, disruptive, and we want to take people with us. So AI, people do use in their. We know this is going to impact people's roles and their jobs. It may not necessarily take out jobs, but it will certainly change the way people do their jobs. And so I think, ensuring that actually we're taking everyone with us, and, not just the technical teams, but, the end users, the people who work in the services, care workers, as well as, officers within the council. That's an important aspect. I think that's probably the harder element, because that change management takes time. And like any change curve, there's always a little bit apprehension around and worry and concern around what does this mean to me? Can I still do my role? But I think what I do think is if you design these services with those users, there's more of an appetite and more willingness to be innovative. So I think that's where we need to probably focus our attention moving forward, is the people change, the organizational change.
You mentioned that you've spent a lot of your career up before Westminster working in transformation. And my kind of final question for this part of our chat now is, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from your time delivering the services to citizens in the public sector, that were you at some point in your career, and I'm not trying to hasten you on from Westminster City Council, but were you to move back to the private sector, what's the biggest learning that you've taken from the public sector that you think would be most useful back in the private?
If I had to pinpoint one thing, and it would be, I guess, the public sector's laser focus on social impact and purpose-driven sort of leadership. So why are we doing these things? I think that has been, a real sort of a privilege to be part of, and it's still a privilege to be part of. And I think that's one of the reasons, I joined, because you can see a direct impact on people with the changes you actually make. It doesn't have to take a long time. So I think there are smaller changes you can make, as well as barring the sort of the more system-wide transformations you need. So I think it's that. I think it's the clarity of, I guess, mission and narrative. And I think, working in a really ambiguous area, that I think has strengthened my, ability to really focus on how do we measure success. So how do we use data to baseline where we are? If we have a strategy, how do we then measure the fact that actually that's, we are progressing in that, towards that the right direction and in line with the goals. So I think those are the things, that purpose-driven leadership and social impact.
It strikes me from hearing you talk there, we're talking about mission and purpose here, that with your role in Westminster now, you've found an environment where there is a strong overlap between your personal mission, what makes you tick, where your North Star is, as sometimes difficult as that it can be to define. There's a same sense of direction there. And if you ever were to move back into private sector as well, I'm sure there would be a lot of thinking that goes into understanding whether the company that you would move to also has that kind of alignment with your own personal sense of self, with your own personal mission as well. I can relate to that an awful lot, having worked in both private and public sector myself. And even with the work that I do now, there's a strong element of public service to a chunk of that work. And that's really, really important to me as well. Thank you for sharing that. There are some questions we ask all of our guests before we let them go. Our show's called CXO Secrets. So I have to ask you, what is your secret? If you could put your modesty to one side for a moment, tell us what key attribute you believe, or maybe what an attribute someone else would say about you that has enabled you to do what it is that you do now?
I think I've always, I guess, been a very people-oriented person. And I think one of the things that I would say that's really helped me is, I suppose, building inclusive, sort of high-trust teams with psychological safety. So my leadership style is really about empowering and encouraging and developing, members of not just my team, but others as well. And I think that I guess does filter into a stronger cohesive culture in terms of an ambition to try and tackle and work together to address problems that we have. I think there's something around, I guess, coming back to my early career around ecosystems and complexity and ambiguity around, I guess, seeing around corners and trying to take a more systems design and systems thinking approach to say, actually, how do all of these complex areas fit together as a jigsaw? And if you shift one area, how does that how would that have repercussions, and both positive and negatively in other areas? So I think there's that element as well in working ambiguity and trying to paint a canvas through the lens of complexity. And I think my other point was actually, so I do understand tech, but it's also, but I think more critically, it's understanding problems. And I think if you can understand the problems and the needs and really trying to focus on what are the one or two things that will really change the needle, then applying the tech on top of it, I think that's probably my third takeaway. So it's not quite the one thing, but I think there are three principles that I adhere to.
When I was a very young engineer, embarking on my first steps into industry, a course that the company I was working for at the time, they sent me on the technical courses, of course, system admin this, database admin that, but it was a week-long problem solving and decision-making course. And yes, AIX version 4 is long out of the window now, and my DB2 days are far behind me. But the skills that I learnt and still apply in PSDM are with me, and I don't think will ever go away. And they've been some of the most important lessons that I've taken with me for that week-long course. Thank you, manager from 25 years ago, for sending me on that course, because it certainly had a real impact on me.
And you realise, David, don't you? I mean, so I remember doing as part of my MBA, a systems thinking and product design course in Helsinki. And you realise actually it wasn't the technology that really was, when we went through the course and looked at innovation and new ideas and solving pain points, it wasn't the technology. It was those tools, those techniques, empathy, understanding actually from another person's point of view, what are you trying to address? And actually, I think that those principles apply now, they've applied previously, and they'll always apply in the future as well. And I think if there's any advice I'd give anyone, it's focus on the problem. Get the tools and the techniques and you need to do that, because it is a science. There's a methodology there. There's a way to, design your experiment. It is a way to analyze your results, and there's a way to draw your conclusion to say what would be your next steps. And I think that really loops it back down to that scientific rigor you should be applying, as well as probably the artistic, creative field of actually, well, how do we think differently to solve some of these problems? Finally,
Gurpreet, what question would you like me to put to a future guest on a future episode of the show?
I think one of the things I always reflect on is, what are the things that have really changed the way I've developed and adapted to different situations? So I think the question I'd be really interested in is, what is one failure that taught you more than any of your success could?
Great question, and one I don't think we've actually had yet on the show. So I look forward to putting that to a future guest. Gurpreet Muctor, it's been terrific to chat to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.